Hello, everyone. Welcome to Jeremy Hadler's Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Hadler, and today's episode, I will be talking about, is it ethical for a sports organization to alter its values or traditions to attract high-paying sponsors? With a special guest who is an expert in sports sponsorships in the sports industry, Anthony Candelori, which we'll have him in a bit. To give you a background about this topic, sponsorships are vital for sports organizations, but the ethical concerns arise to alter the values or traditions to attract high-paid sponsors is research shows a sponsor's moral alignment can impact a team's reputation, fan connection, perceived benefits. So they can get everything that they want of a market value out of the money, but how does it affect them of like ethical issues? Well, I'm going to talk about today, which by looking through a couple articles, especially in the role culture in sports sponsorship, highlights that the needs for sports teams to consider for cultural habits and traditions when choosing sponsors to avoid alienating fans. Sponsorships also influence consumer behavior. So, for example, if I'm with the Philadelphia Phillies and I work for them and I look on their jersey patch, Independence Blue Cross right up here on their patch, that could attract of like, oh, that's always going to be a Philly thing. Whereas like you go look at the New York Mets, it's this Bank Park, all like a fan might think, oh, that's evil. Like that's for the New York Mets. Like we hate the Mets, we hate Citibank. So it could be altering of how companies like align with big market teams or small market teams. So that's a big influence of the consumer behavior. And other articles I looked at too, my research was the impact of sports sponsorship perceptions and attitudes on purchasing decisions examines how fans purchase decisions making are shaped by the sponsorships, whether it's in the team stores of looking at jerseys, outfits, or looking at like little collectible toy gear too. So those are other influences that are shaped by the sponsorship, but most importantly, in corporate social responsibility. But with the ethical risks that exist, is the article sports sponsorships and partnerships are hidden ethical risk threatening your reputation, warns of issues. So cases like them have been sports washing, environmental concerns. So are you willing to accept like Red Bull if it's polluting the air? Are you willing to accept that as a sponsorship? Especially the reputation damage, so it could really affect and hurting the brand for the Philadelphia Phillies, for example. But as like the money incentives grows for like how much the sponsorship continues, sports organizations try to weigh the benefits of the pros and cons to see, is it worth it to have like a company that's known for polluting its air? Is it really worth it or not? That's how it has to figure out for the sports company, how they value things, and there's traditions too within the company. But my guest here on today is Anthony Candelori. Anthony is currently working for a sports company called Sponsor United as the Philadelphia marketing manager. He's also in charge of the National Women's Soccer League he just got recently. Congrats to him on that. And he's also the training admin for Sponsor United too. And he's worked there for nearly 4 years, graduated from the University of South Carolina in 2020, majored in sports management. And to give you background of what Sponsor United is, it's a sports and entertainment company that tracks a lot of sponsorships. So if you're going to venue game like the Phillies versus Colorado Rockies, for example, he's looking, since he's in charge of the Philadelphia market area, he's looking at how much he's seeing of the sponsorship, whether it's on the Jumbotron, products being sold in concession stands, team stores. Anywhere you see a sponsor, Anthony basically tracks that, and is also trying to figure out what is right and wrong of like should be tracked or that should not be tracked. And also depends what type of sponsor is. So those are the things that he looks for. And Sponsor United just is a data-driven insight of trying to track those sponsorships through various industries, whether that's in the sports industry, collegiate sports, the music industry, entertainment industry, and the platform with Sponsor United helps brands and teams and agencies track the sponsorship deals. So how much was the jersey patch for the Philadelphia Phillies? That was $68 million for 3 years. Pretty ridiculous to see how sports sponsorships keep going up and up in the craziness. Sponsor United collects and organizes data in the sponsorship assets and the brand partnerships and advertising trends to allow users to be able to use that. And Gatorade, for example, how should Nike market themselves compared to like Gatorade, even though they're two different types of brands? How should they market themselves to get a lot of equity in that from the fans and get a lot of profits from that? So my first question to you, Anthony, is how have you seen sponsorship affect professional sports teams at your current job with Sponsor United?
Oh, it's a very good question, Jeremy. By the way, thank you for welcoming me on to the podcast today. It's a pleasure to be here. You know, sponsorships can really help provide crucial funding that a team needs to operate and thrive, because these days it has never been more expensive to operate a team, and especially if you want eyeballs on your team and play competitive and be well and play well, you're going to need a lot of money to back that up. And you know, there's plenty of ways that teams organize revenue through ticket sales and merchandise and all those things. But really a key aspect of it is sponsorships. In some organizations, they can really be the lifeblood to keep them going. For example, in the sport of NASCAR, you'll see tons of sponsors all over all the cars. That's their primary source of revenue that those race teams need to stay on the track and just even make these races in the first place. You also see this, whether it's big companies or big sporting brands like, say, Major League Baseball teams to small Division I programs like, say, Drexel basketball. A lot of them will have a sponsor for the entire season, like Independence Blue Cross, like you were saying. The entire season for Drexel basketball is sponsored by Independence Blue Cross. So one company can have a really, really major impact on just providing the necessary funds to just keep the operation going.
To follow up on that, how have you seen sports organizations like Drexel University, you just mentioned, balance the need for financial sustainability through sponsorship while maintaining their core values and traditions that they do at the game and the university itself?
Well, that's a good question. Teams can maintain their core values and traditions, I think, through finding brands that represent them well. And I found often this is the case for local brands that are really popular in a particular city. So like Independence Blue Cross, like you mentioned, they probably sponsor the entire season of Drexel basketball because they are a Philadelphia sports team. They play in University City, the heart of the city, where Independence Blue Cross does a lot of their business and ensuring people around the Philadelphia area. It's a very large media market. So, because they have that local branding, we're able to better ingrain themselves into the community. And you see this with big teams and small teams. Independence Blue Cross will sponsor a small basketball team, college basketball team, or a big Major League Baseball team in a variety of ways. Jeremy, I know you're a Packers fan. I'm sure the Packers have a lot of small regional brands that people in Green Bay, Wisconsin, or maybe the state of Wisconsin know, but probably wouldn't be super recognizable elsewhere. So teams can maintain a core value in their tradition through highlighting local brands who have impacted a lot in their community. These people know these brands, maybe they're even employed by them, or know people who these brands have impacted their lives in some way. So I think that's how you really keep the traditions and core values on the same page.
I always see like with the sports teams, like with the Phillies, it might be Wawa, or like you just mentioned the Packers, it might be Quick Trip. It's always the local sponsors that get the most because obviously you just mentioned before, they're trying to stay the core value and traditions. They're trying to stay within that presence of like, hey, the consumer might know the gas station of Wawa, for example, is like more localized and more knowledge based. Whether it's like your favorite Philly cheesesteak, for example, it's like knowing what are like the local sponsors compared to like the whole brand, like the whole global world. Because, for example, like I'm a Packers fan and I don't live in Wisconsin, but I might not know like the local sponsors and like the main sponsors of Green Bay Packers, like Culver's, for example. That might be something to stand out for like the local media, but that doesn't stand out to the whole media in that aspect. Another question I have for you is, what are like potential risks to sports organizations' repetition when partnering with like a controversial sponsor products? How do you see that as a potential risk with them?
Yeah, it's definitely a potential risk when there's a polarizing or a controversial sponsor, whether it's the nature of the industry that the sponsor is in. It's a careful calculations teams have to be made of being associated with a brand. So if a brand is struggling financially, or if they are just controversial just by their nature, they're probably going to have to pay a higher price in order to have that team see them as a worthy organization to associate with. We see this all the time in a lot of personalized deals. Athletes will take on sketchy brands for unhealthy products, things like vape products, or like these really intense energy drinks that have like hundreds of milligrams of caffeine. Those brands probably had to pay more because they know that there's a risk coming on by taking part in a controversial brand, which a lot of people might not find savory. But it seems to be that people seem to be willing to go along with controversial sponsors, basically, if they think that the price is right and if they think that that sponsorship won't be a deterrent for existing fans.
What's a recent example that you've come upon, whether it's like looking at the players' sponsorships or team sponsorship? What have you seen like recently with your work as sponsor? Have you seen one before?
Yeah, I have. So there's a NASCAR driver, Kyle Busch. For many years, he drove the M&M's car, a very child-friendly car. And then when he joined a new racing organization, Richard Childress Racing, he actually got a new deal with a company that, among other things, makes edible marijuana products. So he's kind of going from one end of the spectrum to the other, of going to a very child-friendly candy to a decidedly not child-friendly candy whatsoever.
Yeah.
So there can be pretty drastic swings at times, and I think that goes to show that there's obviously a much bigger consumer audience for M&Ms than for marijuana candy, but I guess the bigger that there's enough of an audience of a marijuana candy and they have the money to make it a worthwhile endeavor.
So to go right back off that, like, how have you seen the concept of like sports washing factor into the ethics of like accepting a sponsor from certain governments, corporations?
Well, yeah, sports washing can certainly complicate ethics, and teams are kind of put into a position where they have to make some tough calculations about whether the potential negative PR is worth that. Nike is a very good example with the Olympics. They obviously have a pretty notorious history of child slave labor, which is certainly not a good thing. We see it too with various sports organizations like the Live Golf golfers joining an organization backed by the Saudi Arabian government. Same thing with the WWE, now doing several of their big pay-per-view shows in Saudi Arabia now. I mean, this is a government that has had a long history of oppressing women and racial minorities in their country. But yeah, they're absolutely taking part in sports washing because they have the financial means to do so, and they're offering so much money that a lot of brands are willing to take on the risk of negative PR and kind of put their morals aside just because it helps so much for their bottom line. And I struggle with that because it does bother me how ethics are so easy to just be tossed aside. But, when you work for a publicly traded company and the benefit of its shareholders is your number one bottom line, teams are put into a tricky decision where sometimes ethics can get in the way of that. So it's definitely a tricky situation and something I think we're going to see a lot more of as the years continue.
How do you see the influence of high-paying sponsors potentially affect the integrity of like sporting events or athletes' performances?
Yeah, so we definitely see high-paying sponsors can challenge preconceived notions or established protocols of a league. A classic example is when Nike made the Air Jordan sneaker. That sneaker was originally banned from the NBA because it had something to do with the amount of color versus the amount of white on the sneaker. The NBA banned it and was fined Michael Jordan. Nike said, "We don't care. We will pay that fine every night to make sure our shoe is on the court." Eventually, the NBA realized that it just wasn't a hill worth dying on, and they amended the rules. So high-paying sponsors can definitely change those established protocols, and I think it's up to the fans to be the jury on that if that's a worthy thing. Another example we can see right now in Major League Baseball with the new torpedo bats that the Yankees have debuted. Different MLB players want switching over to Victus, who I believe are the manufacturer of those bats, and whether or not this is a good thing for the league still has to be adjudicated. But the bottom line is that high-paying sponsors, if they are forward-thinking enough and are willing to challenge the established protocols, can have a major impact on the sports we consume.
Definitely. I remember, like you just mentioned, the Michael Jordan one. That's a great example. I remember also like another time with Michael Jordan was the Dream Team, the Olympics, where they're doing the winning ceremony where he's about to get his gold, and he cannot put like Nike, he can't show it because he'll get fined if he does. So like how you mentioned with the shoe brand, he put a American flag over that to protect him of the fine and try to be more patriotic to stand out. So it's more marketable for not only him, but also marketable for the upcoming Michael Jordan shoe brand. So that definitely gets played a factor. You mentioned before, it does influence how athletes make a decision sometimes. If they want to showcase their brand, how do they want to showcase it? Do you want to show it in a batting commercial or like the torpedo bats? Like definitely makes it a marketable for the athletes not itself, but also influence their decision making of whether they really want to buy into this market of, oh, I want to have these shoes. You got to buy the shoes, like Spike Lee always said in his commercials for Michael Jordan. Like it depends, especially, but definitely does influence the athletes.
It absolutely does. You're right about that.
How can sports organizations ensure transparency in their sponsorship agreements while protecting their ethical standards? So whether it might be like the Sean Watson case that has gone for many years, or Justin Tucker, for example, how do you see that?
Well, yeah, that's a very good question. I think oftentimes, for the sake of transparency of these sponsorship agreements, there really needs to be frequent communication with public relations from the team, because public relations can have a great deal of influence of how the fan base can perceive news to the team or how a sponsor can look at the team. And the fact of the matter is that sponsorships are meant to be visible. They're always going to be seen, because, I mean, why else are companies going to give money to your organization if not for the visibility? So the fact of the matter is, if there's a sponsored deal, it's inevitably going to be seen. It's also going to be tracked by organizations like mine, Sponsor United, as well, down the line. So teams have to make a choice when they are transparent, and it all starts, I think, with frequent communication from their PR department.
Definitely. What are the long-term implications for the sports organizations' loyalty and community support if it's like significantly alters like the sponsorship value? So, like for example, we've seen like with the Oakland Raiders and the Oakland Athletics, they're moving to Las Vegas. How does that alter like the sponsorship value, but trying to stay commitment to like the fan loyalty community? So, like forever, like the Raiders didn't want to give up their spot; they wanted to stay because they want to stay true to their fans. But Las Vegas definitely helps them financially and gets a better market for them.
Yeah, definitely. So definitely is a shift in terms of, I guess, the scale of the sponsorship. When you're changing cities, you're not going to have a lot of local brands because the brands of the city you're leaving will want nothing to do with you because your organization is effectively abandoning that city. But the new city who a team is arriving to don't have enough time to get local deals in place yet, let alone get a sense of how the team factors into that team's local culture, that city's local community. So that's at a time where national brands will take over. So I imagine over the next few years with the Athletics, we're not going to see many Vegas-specific brands, nor are we going to see many Northern California-specific brands because of this transitionary process. I think it's going to be a lot of national brands taking over. Another thing I wanted to add, too, is that there can also be a lot of growth in terms of globalization of sponsorships. We see it with Shohei Ohtani and the Dodgers because they have a superstar player from Japan. There's a lot of Japanese eyeballs who are on the Dodgers. So there's new Japanese companies coming in, which on one hand is a good thing for the team. Obviously, it's a lot of international money coming in, but there's also the risk that if sponsors can get too globalized for a team, the loyal fans of that team might feel a little bit alienated. If you're not seeing local brands in your company, but you're seeing a lot of Japanese characters that you can't even read, that might cause some alienation with fan base over time. So definitely something that teams should be wary of when making those decisions.
You mentioned already through this podcast episode, how have you seen that for sponsorship choices? Like what lessons can be learned from the past controversies for sports organizations facing that?
Well, Jeremy, honestly, I have found that, frankly, teams don't care that much about fan opinion about sponsorships if the money is good enough. Even if sponsorships don't make a lot of sense, if multinational companies have the resources, which they certainly do, organizations will accept that. So McDonald's and Coca-Cola will always sponsor the Olympics, even if fans don't like it and say it's antithetical to the ideas of health and wellness, because McDonald's and Coca-Cola are two of the biggest companies in the world who are available in over 100 nations, truly one of the most globalist corporations.
Yep.
We're going to be able to stick around in the Olympics for a long time to come, even if the fans don't appreciate that. We see that also, everywhere. We see so many ads now for betting apps in baseball. Less than, actually about 35 years ago now, Pete Rose was banned for life for his involvement with betting on the game. And now it is widely accepted that betting apps are going to be plastering live lines during baseball games, which again is antithetical to the values of the game and probably the values of a lot of fans, but because it's such lucrative deals, teams are pretty willing to step up to controversial companies and brands and industries if the price is right. We see this all the time too with the Saudi Tourism Board plastering their stuff in WWE. There's the Saudi Arabia Tourism Board literally has their logo plastered onto the WWE ring at this point, which just goes to show just how visible a controversial entity can be and still be a successful partnership for the company. So I hate to end this interview on a little bit of a downer note, but the fact of the matter is controversies in sponsorship will only continue because controversial companies tend to have a lot of money and continue to flex their financial muscles that way.
Anthony, thank you for doing this interview with me. I appreciate it. And that does it here, folks, for the Jeremy Hadler Sports Podcast, of where today's episode, once again, where we talked about, is it ethical for a sports organization to alter its values or traditions to attract high-paying sponsors? That's a wrap in the studio, folks, and we'll see you next time.